Hey, today we're going to be looking at one of the more controversial books in all of the Old Testament. You may not know that there's a lot of controversy about this book because maybe you're just familiar with the story or the Veggie Tales or the flannel graph. Today we are talking about the book of Esther. And before we dig into the book of Esther, I want to just let you know about the controversy around it. The first main thing that people have a problem with is that if you scour the entire book of Esther, it's several chapters. It's about, let me see, it's 10 chapters long. You will not find the name of God or even God referenced as a character. And so throughout history, many people have had a lot of problems with this book. In fact, a lot of our manuscripts that we have, a lot of our historical evidence that we have of the Bible trace back to the Dead Sea Scrolls that the Essenes kept in a cave just outside of the area of the Dead Sea. And the book of Esther was not found as one of those documents. So even the Essenes, the people who were the keepers of the Dead Sea Scrolls, did not see Esther as an important biblical document. Some people believe that's because they were kind of really strict religious people, and they read over these books and realized that God was not mentioned, and so they didn't want to keep it in their collection of scrolls. There's just a lot of questions about it. And so Esther has been one of those books that people have wanted to cut from the canon throughout history, cut from the historical books like the full Bible throughout history, but many people have made a case to keep the book because it does clearly make a case for God's sovereignty, God's care for his people. And so it's just an interesting thing to think about as we read over the book of Esther. Obviously, the story is pretty compelling. It's a very interesting story that's easy to be drawn into, but it has been controversial throughout history. The other interesting thing to know about the book of Esther is that many people believe that King Ahasuerus is actually King Xerxes, the king of the Medes and Persians. And this King Xerxes is the one who would have been the opposing king in the story of the 300, where the Greeks fought the Medes and Persians. And Xerxes, if you've seen the movie 300, Xerxes is kind of this like crazy, exaggerated, wicked god king. That is the same Xerxes here referenced as Ahasuerus, who Queen Esther is going to approach. So if you saw the movie 300, and the movie itself is really exaggerated in a lot of ways, but if you saw the movie and you saw how they represented Xerxes as kind of this like incredibly frightening individual, you might get to understand some of Esther's hesitations, some of her fears of the king, as well as some of Mordecai's like cunning and planning, because this king is not somebody to mess around with. He's not somebody that's like a pretty easygoing guy, and we see that at the very beginning. Like this queen initially with Ahasuerus is Queen Vashti. We see her introduced in chapter 1, but when she kind of says, "No, I'm not really into being a spectacle in your drunken party," she's quickly cast out of being the queen, and there's this like beauty pageant kind of thing that ensues that allows Queen Esther to catch the eye of Ahasuerus. Now, obviously, this is a sort of odd story. It definitely objectifies women in a pretty significant way. This is not what God intends for people. This is not a book that you read and say, this is a great way to live life. But it is an example of how God uses really odd circumstances, things that are not necessarily pleasing to the Lord, to bring about like a story, a pattern, a way of life that is pleasing to the Lord. So here we have Esther, this Jew that is kind of thrown into this story, being put in a place where she can have incredible influence during a dark period where there's some pretty significant decisions being made that are very threatening to God's people. Now, so just so you understand where this fits in the narrative, we have been kind of talking about the exile, how the people were judged by God. They were carried into exile by Nebuchadnezzar in different phases. Then the Babylonian Empire is kind of thrown into confusion and taken over by this empire of Medes and Persians. And so during Cyrus's reign, the people are allowed in kind of a smaller number to return home, which is what we have been reading about in parts of Ezra, parts of Zechariah. The people are returning home, but there are still a remaining number of people and remaining number of Jews left throughout the Mede and Persian Empire. And so Mordecai would be one of those people. Esther would be one of those people. And there's just kind of this story, this record of Jews being scattered all over the place at this time. So while this story is taking place, there are people in Jerusalem who have returned from exile, rebuilding the temple and trying to establish a life of pleasing the Lord. So just to kind of put this all in a nutshell, we are introduced to this dude Haman. He's not a good guy. He decides that there should be an edict to not only destroy Mordecai, but destroy all the Jews. Esther, while this is all being cooked up, is kind of a new queen. She is a queen that the king really appreciates, and she's put in this incredible situation where she could possibly stop this plot of destroying everyone. And her uncle, Mordecai, at one point tells her that it could be for just a time as this that you have been brought to this place. And I think that might be the most compelling thing that we read today. We read Esther 1-5, and it kind of has this idea of like we don't necessarily know God's plan, but when we are faithful to Him, when we are obedient to Him, when we are honoring to Him, we could be playing a much, much bigger part than what we're aware of. So Mordecai is allowing Esther to know this, and it is something that pushes Esther to take a step of faith, put herself in harm's way. Like I said, if you saw the movie 300, this Xerxes dude is not messing around. And so she puts herself in a place where she can either be heard by the king or she can be put to death by the king. What's really interesting is right before she steps out, she encourages everybody in her court, as well as all the Jews in the land, to put on a time of prayer and fasting for 3 days. No food, no water, nothing for 3 days. They want to really seek the Lord and honor the Lord. And I think it's cool how the book of Esther highlights the importance of prayer and fasting. This is an extreme fast where they don't do anything for 3 days. And as we continue through the narrative, we get the idea that God honors this fast. God honors Esther's obedience. And one of the things that is a precursor to this like courageous move of stepping out before the king is actually another courageous move of denying herself, denying her court, denying her people food and drink for 3 days. I don't know if you've ever done a 3-day fast. It is not an easy feat, particularly if you're not going to do any drinking. But it is like a helpful, meaningful thing to pause, to pray and fast. In our modern age, there's this idea that fasting is just giving up anything. That's really not true. Fasting has always been understood as giving up food, and in extreme circumstances, giving up drink. And here we see Esther doing exactly that. The early church actually fasted on Wednesdays and Fridays every single week to honor Jesus and what he had done, and to make space for being sustained by God's word instead of bread. So that's like Jesus refers to. Man cannot live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. So fasting is a huge part of the story here. Obviously, faithfulness to God is a huge part of the story, even though God's name is not invoked. And I'm excited to see what else is going to happen here in this narrative. So as far as the year part goes, just encourage you to really strengthen your relationship with the Lord through prayer and fasting, and also to understand that God has put you in the place that you are for such a time as this. You could have lived in any period or any time, and God has chosen to put you in this period and this time because he has a purpose and a plan for you. And so I just encourage you to be faithful to the Lord, I encourage you to be obedient to him and just walk boldly in whatever your circumstance is, right? We're all in different situations and circumstances, but whatever your situation is, have faith in God, keep your eyes fixed on him, be obedient to him, because you are most likely here for such a time as this. So no matter how crazy it seems, God has put you here on purpose because he plans to use your faithfulness to honor him and perhaps save some other people in the process. So be encouraged by that. We'll be back into Esther again tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.